Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and this is the third installment on this little series that I've been doing on Tucker and his interview with Putin. The first video I did was the pre-video, my impression before I saw the actual interview. The second video I did was my critique as I was watching the video. And then this last installment is the media coverage post-release of the interview to see if there's media bias. All right. Now, of course, we have this knee-jerk reaction. There is media bias, but I just want to cursory the coverage of Tucker and Putin, and just to see what kind of bias there is. All right. And then that will probably be the end of my coverage on this particular topic. So I'm doing a simulcast for my audience that's on X and also for my video audience. So let's begin. Let's start with what was portrayed on NBC News dealing with the interview with Putin by Tucker.
Because I win re-election, I need you by my side from the very start. Whatever you're able to chip in, even if it's just a buck or two.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine, and Carlson posted the interview. Tucker Carlson is out with his highly anticipated interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is Putin's first interview with a Western media figure since Russia invaded Ukraine, and Carlson posted the interview on his website. The Kremlin confirming today the interview will also be posted on their website in both Russian and English. NBC reporter Matt Bodner has been following it for us. Matt, this interview has been making some waves, right?
That's right. Well, Tucker Carlson was in Moscow for several days this week, and he really made quite a show of his visits. Of course, we had this interview with President Putin, which released today. But in the lead up to that, there was kind of a lot of tone setting. We saw Tucker Carlson touring through the city, just kind of trying to get a taste of normal life, interacting ostensibly with members of the public, who seems quite interested in talking to him. And there's always an element of Russia that's very interesting to watch, is despite all of the harsh rhetoric you see on a daily basis from the state media, from Russian officials, sometimes from Russians themselves. When an American of prominence lands in Moscow, they really do roll out the red carpet, and we see a lot of the kinds of things that we've been seeing. But as for the interview itself, it is a lot of things that we were expecting. Tucker Carlson did put out a promo video, essentially characterizing this as an interview that was going to be heavily focused on U.S. affairs, on U.S. involvement in Ukraine, of course, U.S.-Russia relations, but we were also seeing a number of other interesting things. What I really want to highlight is that Tucker Carlson did ask President Putin about the imprisoned Wall Street Journal journalist Evan Gershkovich. And here's what President Putin had to say. And this is all, of course, very interesting because President Putin has not made too many public comments on Gershkovich's situation. And so I'll quote from him now. "We are willing to solve it, but there are certain terms being discussed via special services channels. I believe an agreement can be reached. I do not rule out that the person you refer to, Mr. Gershkovich, may return to his motherland. But at the end of the day, it does not make any sense keeping him in prison in Russia." There's, of course, a lot more in this interview, but that is perhaps one of the most encouraging things we've heard from Vladimir Putin say in a long time. And it'll be interesting to see what concrete steps can be taken from there. Other topics of interest, including Elon Musk, but really prominently the situation in Ukraine, U.S.-Russia relations, and President Putin's view on how to stop that.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News.
Okay, so for that particular segment, it was pretty boilerplate. It wasn't too negative, right? So that was just informative. I'll put it in the informative category. Now let's go to CNN.
Russian President Vladimir Putin getting a from former Fox host Tucker Carlson in Moscow, sitting down for a 2-hour interview. At one point, Putin suggested the US should negotiate with Russia over this whole war in Ukraine. Listen to this.
Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia, make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end, and realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions? It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Joining us now, CNN senior media analyst Sarah Fisher and CNN senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen, who is in Ukraine.
Now, I know that they only have a 9-minute segment, right? And they can't play the whole interview. But the thing is that Putin said 5 points on why they went into Ukraine. There were 5 things that America did that pushed Russia over the edge. And in a nutshell, it's this encroachment because America thinks they can do whatever they want because of this never ending national security state that thinks they're not beholden to anybody, and that you have an old apparatus from the Cold War, from the think tanks, that keeps on having this mentality of a Cold War stance. Of course, they don't bring that up.
For 2 years, Western media outlets, including CNN, have been asking for sit-down interviews with President Putin. When you watch this, why do you think Putin and his team agreed to it?
Well, I think that they agreed to it because they thought it would be beneficial for them. In fact, that's something that the Kremlin did say before this interview took place. They say that they feel that there's no benefit for them for communicating, as they put it, with, as they call us, traditional Western media. They say that they believe that Western media is biased against Russia. And, some of the reactions that we've been getting this morning from the Kremlin, they seem pretty pleased with what happened there in that interview, what transpired in that interview. They say, this is the spokesman for the Kremlin, they believe this interview will be studied in the future. They say that other media outlets are jealous of this interview. There's been some reaction from the Ukrainians as well.
Well, let because I watched the interview twice. I did the critique and then I, watched it without critiquing it. And I'll tell you, this idea of long form, let the guest speak, I think is the proper format, especially for really important topics. Not like an interview by Oprah or something like that, but really topics of significance, like what's going on in world affairs, what's going on with artificial intelligence, what's going on with the restructuring of labor and capital, and having that guest speaker, let's say if it's the Federal Reserve Chairman or whoever, let them talk. The problem is that these interviewers, they have a tendency to spend too much time asking 3-level questions. The guest doesn't remember everything that they asked, and they just, it's ad-libbed and truncated, where there's not much substance. It's important to have a long form. The only thing that I would have done differently than what Tucker did was that, and maybe he did, and he just hasn't said it, he should have had that interview go for 4 or 5 hours long and cut it up in 2-hour segments. All right. I think there was a lot of ground that could have been covered that wasn't covered, because I think Tucker had this kind of like one foot in the old news media kind of mentality where there's these short segments. And so he thought that, well, we'll just do one, 2-hour cut. Well, he could have taken a break and then done another 2-hour cut, and it would have been a 4-hour video. That would have been even better. So Tucker's got like one foot in the old world, in terms of journalism, and the other foot in kind of a new genre. Long form, not interrupting the guest on a regular basis during the interview is the right way to do it. And that's what's going to be studied. Well, you're going to have the intelligence agencies study the documents that were given to Tucker, because there were some documents that were given to him if you watch the video. And then the other thing that will be studied will be this format, allowing, the guests to just talk. And then the analysts are going to be looking at mannerisms and things that Putin has said to try to gleam into, some of his psychology. So you're going to have analysts looking at this. But from a journalistic point of view, long form, don't interrupt the guest too much is the proper way to do it.
This is little more than a justification attempt, as one presidential advisor here put it, of the genocide against Ukrainians, he said. It was quite interesting because I've actually been communicating with a journalist that I know inside Russia, and he referred to Tucker Carlson as Vladimir Putin's microphone stand and essentially said this was little more than a monologue by Vladimir Putin. Certainly, we did have long phases of Vladimir Putin essentially trying to give a lesson in history in the whole thing. I think one of the interesting things that we picked up on was when he said that he hadn't actually spoken to President Biden since before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or the full-on invasion of Ukraine, took place, and said that he believed that President Biden's support for Ukraine was a catastrophic mistake, as Putin put it, Phil.
It was very important, Sarah, for Putin to be asked by anyone that sits down with him about detained Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Tucker asked him about that and if he would allow him to be released and come home to the United States. Putin said no, and then he said this.
We're willing to solve.
This 7-second technique bulletproofs the brain against cognitive decline. Thousands of individuals experiencing memory loss, brain fog.
Amazing that commercial
We're
came
willing.
up when they're talking about Biden. But all right.
Solve it. But there are certain terms being discussed via special services channels. I believe an agreement can be reached.
What is your reporting this morning on Evan, as all of us think about him, as his family awaits and waits for him to come home?
You can't trust those words, Poppy. I mean,
Let's demonize Putin for holding a journalist, but let's not demonize the American government and what they're doing to Julian Assange. Okay, CNN? It's amazing.
whole game here for the past year, as they've been wrongfully detaining Evan Gershkovich, is that they've been opaque. They will say one thing, they will negotiate in another way. There is no progress at this point. And so for Vladimir Putin to come out and sort of, suggest that in this Tucker Carlson interview, to me just seems like a way to sort of dodge the one hard question in that interview. I'm actually at a journalism conference right now in Charleston, South Carolina, and the person who is managing the release for Evan Gershkovich, Paul Beckett, on behalf of the Wall Street Journal, he made this point very directly yesterday, which is that you cannot trust anything that the Russian government is saying in regards to this release, because the opaqueness is part of the strategy. The misleading words is part of the strategy. And for Tucker Carlson, by the way, to be the—
But what about mainstream media in America misleading the American public because of the embeddedness of the government within media, aka the Smith-Month Modernization Act? Oh yeah, domestic operations from CIA through the media to be able to control the manufactured consensus.
one Western journalist to get this type of access to Vladimir Putin suggests that Putin knows that this is going to be an interview where he can manipulate the moderator. This was a huge fail on behalf of American journalism. It was a platform for Putin, and it's disappointing for everybody that cares about Evan's safety.
Well, the Wall Street
So
Journal
let me get this straight. So the mainstream media, CNN, is saying that Tucker was being used by Putin, so because of his huge platform, to be able to project some sort of propagandic message. But the problem is that there's a major propaganda of the Ukrainian war by the US government, trying to get you to think that a never-ending conflict with Russia is the best thing. And I went into detail in last video on how they want to fracture Russia and get the oil, have control the resources of the energy sector. It's a Cold War mentality.
You're
They
saying,
don't like-
quote, Evan is a
So what
journalist
it
and
is,
journalism is
they
not
don't
fine.
like they don't like someone questioning the narrative. They're saying Putin is questioning the narrative of what the mainstream media is saying about what's going on with the expansion of NATO. Mainstream media doesn't talk too much about that. It's just the aggression of the Russians. What about the aggression of the United States since the fall of the Berlin Wall, way before Putin was in office? Those are facts. They don't want the narrative to be questioned, just like they didn't want the narrative to be questioned in 2020 during the crisis, and how they shadow banned and canceled independent journalism as we were going through the crisis. The same thing. They want to try to cancel Tucker, so a counter narrative can't be discussed and have the discernment of the citizen to determine if the US government is lying to them or not. And oh, by the way, the US government is lying. Now, it doesn't mean that Putin is lily white. He's not. But to say that we're not doing nefarious things going all the way back to 1991, well, guess what? We have been.
Trail. The contrary is total fiction. We're encouraged to see Russia's desire for a deal that brings Evan home, and we hope this will lead us to his rapid release and return to his family and our newsroom. Joining us now, New Yorker staff writer Susan Glasser and former CIA counterterrorism official Phil Mudd. Phil, I want to start with you because President Putin, in different parts of the interviews, seemed to allude to the individual.
Now remember this Phil Mudd guy. All right, I think that's his name. He's an analyst from 3-letter agencies. So of course he's going to have this Cold War mentality, and heaven forbid you question the CIA.
Whose sourcing was somebody he wanted was putting on the table for a potential swap here, and Vadim Prezikov. Can you walk through how U.S. officials are trying to figure out how to make that work?
How about spending the time CNN and not so much on the journalist, but actually the encroachment that has been going on since the early 90s by NATO, which is killing and killing many more people and harming many more people than this story with the journalist. They're shifting the focus and not really getting to the root cause. The root cause isn't this journalist. The root cause is a runaway national security state. So they'll put Phil Mudd up to represent the CIA and how important they are. Little fucker.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things going on here. There's a parallel between what he said about the Wall Street Journal and what he's saying about Ukraine. And both
Phil Mudd, former CIA counterterrorism official. With lake or riverfront property in the background. Phil Mudd.
Opportunity for propaganda for Putin. That is, in both circumstances, he's saying, look, it's not just on me. It's not my fault. We were not the aggressor in Ukraine. We're not totally at fault with the Wall Street Journal. This is a spy in terms of the Wall Street Journal, and the Ukrainians are the aggressor. We're willing to make a deal only if you guys are reasonable. So I think the propaganda piece here, both to the West and to a domestic audience in Russia, is Putin's ready to make a deal, and he's not the only player at the table. He can't control everything. It's up to the Americans, too. I think it's brilliant.
Susan, this part of the interview that Putin told Tucker Carlson, talking about the situation in Ukraine and where it goes and potentially how it ends. Listen to this.
This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, sooner or later it will result in agreement.
Истерика там, внутренние проблемы.
You know, this probably sounds strange given the current situation.
Все равно мы договоримся.
But the relations between the two peoples will be rebuilt anyway.
Нынешняя ситуация прозвучит.
E-commerce is absolutely booming. Amazon was up 9% this year. Kroger's e-commerce is up 12%, and Walmart's e-commerce is up
It will take a lot of time, but they will heal.
That was really striking to me, and I wonder what struck you when you heard it.
Well, look, yeah, sure. Vladimir Putin is open to a deal to the extent that Ukraine and the West should capitulate to all of his demands. The idea that relations are going to heal between Ukraine and Russia when Russia's leader goes on in an interview and explains why Ukraine does not have a right to exist historically.
Why did the United States expand NATO? Way before Putin was in office. The posturing of aggression is on both sides, but it started after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I think that Putin made it very clear that he wanted to integrate economically with the United States and with its allies and be part of the missile defense system against Iran. But they didn't want that. They didn't want Russia to be integrated economically, and they didn't want Russia to be part of the missile defense system against Iran. The United States wants to go unilaterally. And back then, when they had this game plan, they thought that Russia would not, that Russia would be so weak that they wouldn't be able to catch up. Now they're limping along in terms of economically, but they're far from being dead. They're far from being a non-player on the international stage. They're a major player on the international stage. It's a major mistake. It's going all the way back to the Bush Senior's administration. And these media types, they don't bring that up. The problem is the aggression on both sides. But who started this? The United States. And this idea of this, monopolar world that we can do whatever we want.
Speaking, that tells you a lot about Putin's mindset. But I think, the success that Putin has had is really actually in creating more of a national unity and a national identity for Ukrainians as a result of his denial of their very statehood. And we heard that at great length in that Tucker Carlson interview. He went on and on with a sort of bizarre version of history in which it goes all the way back past the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. He repeatedly to grievances from the year 1654, and he basically asserts the right to Ukraine because Empress Catherine.
I watched it twice. He gave a long historical context of the ebb and flow that was going on in that region, and then focused on the contemporary, where it was World War I, World War II, and that Ukraine as a nation is really a modern construct coming from the world wars. And with a Cold War mentality, what has happened is that in the interim, Ukraine was a buffer country between the Western world and Russia. Now, the United States is trying to make Ukraine not a buffer country, but literally a country at the back door of Russia within NATO. That's the issue. And so he went in a long form, what the history was, that Ukraine really, there is no such thing as Ukraine. Historically, it's been a hodgepodge of different people, Hungarian, Romanian, Polish, Russian, and that ebb and flow has changed over centuries. But there really isn't something called, that Ukraine as a country and as a people is a modern construct. That's fact. And so he let that long form play out so people that had some intellectual curiosity and some patience, and they don't have ADHD, which most Americans have, be able to look at this long arc and then realize that Russia kept on getting pressured by the West, especially by the United States, which pushed Putin into a stance of aggression. Now, again, both sides are at fault. But who's really the aggressor here? The aggressor really is the United States.
Of Russia took over part of the territories in modern day Ukraine in the late 18th century. So, again, what does this mean in a practical sense? I did not hear any specific sense that Vladimir Putin is acknowledging reality. What I heard is that he would like.
No, he did acknowledge reality. He was saying the Northern Caucasus and how the United States used the CIA, Phil Mudd, to cause operations for instability along its borders. While we were trying to fight terrorism in the Middle East right after 9/11. And you don't think that that's some sort of aggressive posturing by the United States, when the United States literally told them that they were going to continue doing it in funding and supporting the separatists? What about that, CNN? Huh? What about that, Phil Mudd? Oh, by the way, I think Phil Mudd was actually at the CIA in counterterrorism during that period of time. What about that, Phil Mudd? Fucker.
For Ukraine and to accede to all of his terms.
Yeah, Phil, that was actually what I was going to ask you. This is
Phil, come on,
around 2
tell
hours.
us.
The history lesson that Susan was just talking about, I think it ran about 38,
She
39
summarized it
minutes.
well in
Yeah, that was
a
actually,
minute.
a lot quicker. Clear, concise. That's a good writer for you. I'm interested if there was anything you heard in this that you thought either was newsworthy or that, as in your former life, would have given you some indication of something you wanted to pursue.
Yeah, there is one piece that struck me, and that is timing. Why would you do this now? I'll probably read too much into it, but I'm a CIA analyst. That's what we do. The short version is you're looking obviously at divisions in the American Congress that might widen over time between those who want to support Ukraine and those who don't. There's obviously divisions between parties and presidential candidates going into an intense American election. There are divisions between potentially the Americans and NATO, and there are problems in Ukraine. You saw the past week, the Ukrainians changing out generals. So if you look at timing, you could read into this if you're an analyst, and that's what I do for a living, that Putin sees blood in the water. He sees an opportunity to drive a wedge going into an election, and his driving of that wedge over.
Oh, wait. Phil, Mr. Counter-Terrorist at the CIA and former whatever at the FBI. Didn't you see that there was an opportunity to try to fracture Russia right after the fall of the Berlin Wall? What about the pressure points in the Northern Caucasus that the CIA was projecting and causing instability on the Russian border? What about Jeffrey Sachs in the shock therapy with their economy when they were trying to open it up to a free market and basically destroyed their currency? There was a CIA operation to break up Russia and get the oil. That's what was going on. Right, Phil? Right, Phil Mudd? Oh, wait a minute. Isn't Mudd related to the doctor that... Maybe not. I don't know. Is he related to the doctor that actually treated John Wilkes Booth, who shot Lincoln when maybe he's not related. I don't know. People would have to investigate that, but I wouldn't be surprised. A traitor is always a traitor. Fucking asshole.
Time is only going to intensify. He sees a chance.
Bill, Mike,
Yeah.
thank you, Susan Glasser.
Yeah.
We appreciate you this morning.
CIA saw a chance to fracture Russia in the last 30 years. It didn't happen. They kept on trying and trying and trying. And now what they want to do is just blame it on Russia. Failed policy. You know what? Iran and the problems that we have today is because of CIA operations in 1950s. Another reason why the national security state needs to be destroyed. All right, let's play the Hill about how the UN or the EU. All right, this is the Hill. The EU wants to sanction Tucker over his interview with Putin. Talking about free journalism in a free Western society that values civil liberties. I'll tell you. But if you question the authority, what did Putin also say? Bojo over at the UK deep sixed the peace agreements.
Well, it's official. Tucker Carlson is, in fact, interviewing Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, while many suspected as much due to Carlson's recent Moscow appearance, the former Fox News host released a video yesterday highlighting the reasons why he thought it was important to hear what Putin had to say. Let's take a look.
Here's why we're doing it. First, because it's our job. We're in journalism. Our duty is to inform people. 2 years into a war that's reshaping the entire world, most Americans are not informed. They have no real idea what's happening in this region, here in Russia or 600 miles away in Ukraine. But they should know. They're paying for much of it in ways they might not fully yet perceive. The war in Ukraine is a human disaster. It's left hundreds of thousands of people dead, an entire generation of young Ukrainians, and has depopulated the largest country in Europe. But the long-term effects are even more profound. This war has utterly reshaped the global military and trade alliances, and the sanctions that followed have as well. And in total, they have upended the world economy.
Following Carlson's announcement video, many took to X to praise him for conducting the interview. Presidential hopeful RFK Jr. posted, "Mainstream media journalists have interviewed Putin many times before. The only difference now is that they can't control the narrative. Zelensky has been given numerous primetime interviews. Osama bin Laden."
I'm sure Kennedy knows a little bit deeper. It's not just the mainstream media. It's the embeddedness of the national security state in the mainstream media that's the issue. And they want to control the narrative. They tried to control the narrative during the crisis in 2020. The enemy is within, and that enemy is CIA.
Has been interviewed before. We have a right to hear from everyone, no matter how you feel personally about them. Former GOP candidate for president Vivek Ramaswamy wrote, "Carlson is a real journalist, actual intellectual curiosity."
But not everyone was so gung-ho on Carlson's interview. CNN's Christiane Amanpour responded to accusations leveled by Carlson that he was the only Western journalist willing to talk with Putin by writing, "Does Tucker really think we journalists haven't been trying to interview President Putin every day since his full-scale invasion of Ukraine? It's absurd. We'll continue to ask for an interview, just as we have for years now." Amanpour seemed to be vindicated by the community notes under Carlson's video, which added a statement by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov that, quote, "Mr. Carlson is not correct. In fact, there's no way you could know this. We received numerous requests for interviews with the president."
Later on in his announcement video, Carlson alleges that the Biden administration hacked into Carlson and his company's phones to get text messages and leak them to mainstream outlets to try and derail the interview. Let's take a look.
Almost 3 years ago, the Biden administration illegally spied on our text messages and then leaked the contents to their servants in the news media. They did this in order to stop a Putin interview that we were planning. Last month, we're pretty certain they did exactly the same thing once again. But this time, we came to Moscow anyway.
Yeah, look, I think there are some true points that are being made here. Of course, it's true that Zelensky has gotten a lot of softball interviews that the mainstream press should be critical of. Of course, it's true that people who are, very much publicly reviled, like Osama bin Laden.
It should be this simple. The President of the United States and Putin should be interviewed by a series of different journalists, some mainstream, some independent. They should be offering questions. It should be long form. It should be about 4 hours long, probably released in installments, to explain the long arc of what has been going on since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And when you do that, you are going to start to understand on how they're assuming that your goldfish memory is going to kick in, and you're going to forget what the real arc of history is and why we are at the point we're at. Our government, the United States government, doesn't want to admit its strategic intelligence failures that have been happening at the CIA. The CIA in general has done more harm to the American citizen and the world peace than doing a yeoman's work. They have caused more strife and more instability in the world, and therefore they should be destroyed.
And Putin have done mainstream news interviews, and that this doesn't have to be any different. It's also true that I think that Tucker Carlson is overstating his case somewhat by saying that no one else has ever tried to interview Putin. He's the one that's been given access that others apparently have not been given access. And that does raise some questions about why it is that he's being permitted this interview and if he's going to take this opportunity to do a real substantive interview. And we can only judge that after we see the interview itself.
Yes. And there is a history, by the way, by mainstream respected journalists.
All right, so I'm gonna go. Let's see here. I'm gonna take a look at. All right, let's hear the Young Turks.
When we came up with Alpha Brain, it was the first one that I ever tried that I was like, this is like a very clear difference between using it and not.
So you said a moment ago that the world would be a lot better if it weren't broken into competing alliances, if there was cooperation globally. One of the reasons you don't have that is because the current American administration is dead set against you. Do you think if there were a new administration after Joe Biden that you would be able to reestablish communication with the U.S. government? Or does it not matter who the president is?
Yes, of course. The lack of world peace really has everything to do with America, nothing to do with the guy who invaded a sovereign country. But anyway, Tucker Carlson announced 2 days ago.
A sovereign country that has only its existence only through a modern construct. Now, is Putin perfect? No. But the point is that the 5 pressure points that took place since his administration in 2000, so for the last 23 years, 24 years, there have been 5 things that happened that made him do what he did. He mentioned it in the interview. And each one of those was that the U.S. closed the door on integrating Russia to a Western society, to the Western market, and the ability to integrate its military to a more global, peaceful security alliance. Instead, the United States wanted to fracture and take the oil. That's what this is all about.
He would be interviewing Vladimir Putin. And today that interview was finally published. We've pulled some clips and we want to discuss it. Now, before we watch, it is important to give you a look.
You know, because I've lived my life long enough to remember these things. This seems like the demonization that was going on with Iraq. Iraq 1 and Iraq 2. And how the media played right into what the Pentagon wanted them, instead of asking the real questions like, where's the weapons of mass destruction? Where's the proof that Saddam Hussein was involved in 9/11? Where's the proof about the babies, you know, being killed in the incubators during the Gulf War? Because you had, quote, mainstream journalists not doing mainstream journalism. It's the same things playing out today, except that now you have the internet and you have these, you know, it's a little bit more chaotic, you know, because of different channels. The segmentation is different. You have international, you have these independent journalists. There's more of them now than before. But it's the same thing. Mainstream journalism is just following along, just like they did in Gulf War I and Gulf War II. Just following along, didn't ask the questions. You had some journalists asking questions, but you know, where's the weapons of mass destruction? Why do something? Well, we got to make sure that we stop the mushroom cloud before it happens. Well, what happens if there would never be a mushroom cloud? Well, we're not going to think about that. All right. Condoleezza Rice.
Bit of context and a note about this 2.5 hour long interview. Nearly half of it is taken up by a monologue by Vladimir Putin. Tucker Carlson opens the interview by asking Putin why he chose to invade Ukraine in 2022. That's the sovereign country that I referenced earlier, of course. Putin then spends almost an hour describing his version of the history of Russia and Ukraine going back to the Middle Ages. And Tucker Carlson only interrupts him a handful of times as he's engaging in this monologue. Now, Putin eventually comes to an answer that isn't really new. It's more of what we've heard from Putin before. He talks about NATO expansion, Western nations were not so friendly to Russia, and too many Nazis in Ukraine, allegedly. That he likes to point to those.
Sorry, young Turk. But the whole arc was proving that there was never a real nation that was Ukrainian. It's a modern construct. That was the reason why there was the long arc of history. The more contemporary stuff that he was talking about are the 5 pressure points that the United States kept on doing, and he kept on warning. So don't be surprised that if you keep on poking the bear and the bear decides to chop your, you know, to grab on your neck. And that's what's happened now. So it's Putin's fault. It must be Putin's fault. It's both people's fault. It's a failure of this Cold War mentality that we have that's eating up our treasury. We don't have the money for this anymore. What's even this girl's name? Anna.
Again, things we've heard before. Go ahead, Jake.
So before the interview, there was questions about, is he going to be tough on Putin? really, does anybody think that he was going to be tough on Putin? But I think you have your answer when you don't interrupt someone for over an hour as they're giving you propaganda. I mean, even if you don't think it's propaganda, you might want to ask a follow-up question. You might want to interject. You might want to challenge something he said.
Jenk, whatever the hell your name is, wipe the bacon grease off your face. Perhaps Tucker is CIA white hat. Perhaps the best thing to do is let the guest speak. One, I think it's a more informative interview because constant interruption by the guest or by the interviewer onto the guest, you lose continuity. And I think more people want less interruption and just more long form interviews. When I try to interview someone on my channel, I try to do a long form and not interrupt so much. But and not to have anything planned. I think that is where this is all going in this kind of era of talking to people. It's a better way. But if you are just intelligent, if you're an analyst, by having a long form and not interrupting him every 10 seconds, like most interviewers do, you actually learn a little bit more about his psyche. You learn a little bit about his health. You learn a little bit more about what's really making him tick. But here's the problem. We have people like the Young Turks and people on CNN and people like Mika and Joe, Morning Joe, that think that they're part of the intelligentsia, that think that they are intelligent, that think that they're going to tell you, the American public, what you should know. Most of them either couldn't get into law school or did get into law school but couldn't practice law successfully. So they go into media. And they use their art of rhetoric to try to project what you should be thinking. That's our mainstream media. So bacon grease, Young Turk, we're going to see the expansiveness of his mind on this subject. Okay, Jenk, wipe the bacon grease off your mouth, okay, and start talking.
In that hour, if he didn't challenge him for an entire hour, what you thought everything he said there was so true, you didn't have to clarify with the audience that perhaps it wasn't. And so, yeah. and then you saw in that just small clip that we.
Why not interviews being more like the style at Oxford for debate, where you let the person fucking talk? Instead of this propaganda method that we have in the United States, where you try to shut them down by just talking over them. And people are tired of it. Bacon grease.
You know, the American government seems so dead set against you. Is that the real problem? Like, we're biased against him. Well, our bias might come from the fact that he invaded Ukraine. But look, we've got our own problems, and I'm perfectly happy to discuss them. In fact, we've discussed them for 20 straight years here on TYT, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But sitting next to a guy who's trying to be an imperial, recreate an imperial empire that has invaded several countries next to him and has started this disastrous war, trying to make him out to be the peacemaker. Wouldn't you love to align with America? Well, don't you want a one world together? It's Biden that's stopping you. Right now, if we had a different president, maybe named Donald Trump, then we could have world peace, couldn't we? It seems like such a
no, it's going to be Trump bash and bacon grease. Okay, Jink. Hide that cheeseburger, all right?
journalism. Come on, he's a joke.
Now,
Total joke.
obviously, just based on what we saw in that first clip, Tucker Carlson is trying to make a point about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden and other American, political leadership that's been less friendly, at least rhetorically, toward Vladimir Putin. So let's continue on with that portion of their interview, that portion of their conversation. So let's watch more of it.
It is not about the leader. It is not about the personality of a particular person. I had a very good relationship with, say, Bush. I know that in the United States, he was portrayed as some kind of a country boy who does not understand much. I assure you that this is not the case. I had such personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader. It is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change.
Can we really trust a man who talks of the intellectual sophistication of George W. Bush? I don't know. I mean, that's, I guess, for you to decide.
Yeah, so I remember when Republicans in America used to be furious with actual journalists like Barbara Walters when they...
Did you notice Anna and Bacon Grease didn't mention what the main thrust of the argument that he was making in that segment? He was saying it doesn't matter who is elected, it's the fucking puppet masters that are ruling the show. Bacon Grease, fucking asshole.
Interviewed people who were not friendly to America. So she interviewed Fidel Castro, and they're like, how dare you? We should never even hear from them. In fact, we found out recently from an interview at the Guardian that CNN says you should not even interview members of Hamas. So for fear that propaganda is going to leak out, etc. So now, what should be the real standard? The real standard is, of course, you interview foreign leaders, whether we like them or don't like them. But as you do that, you are supposed to challenge them with questions, not arguments, not debates, but hey, how about this? How about the fact that Ukraine appeared to be a sovereign nation before you invaded it, right? Things along those lines. But now the Republicans have flipped so much. They're like, oh, you did a softball interview with a foreign leader who hates our government? Atta boy, way to go. I love the way he hates America. That's, I mean, it is so topsy-turvy. It is hard to understand.
No, what's topsy-turvy, Bacon Grease? What's topsy-turvy is that we have a runaway national security state. And 1984 is here. We were warned as Gen Xers, as we were reading Orwell, not to fall into that trap. But our generation allowed it to happen. And it's going to get even worse with AI. Even though I'm not a gigantic fan of David Icke, he's right. This hive mind, they're going to project the watchers, the puppet masters. They're going to project a reality that they want you to succumb to. They want to shape the reality for you instead of you being discerning. You forming your own reality. And in a microcosm, that's what's going on with these media types. So they're not even listening to what Putin said. Putin was basically saying that the power elite is more important than the elected official. And that's the money changers. That's, the big business. It's the big lobbying groups. And then people that are even higher than that. It's not the elected official.
Said, you love it or leave it. America's number one. We hate Russia. We hate our enemies. Now are like, I love that Tucker Carlson kissed Putin's ass, and they both talk about how terrible America is. What happened to you, Republicans?
No,
Yeah, that is really
America is
interesting.
not bad. CIA's bad. CIA needs to be destroyed. Oh, didn't we hear that from JFK? Oh, what happened in Dallas in November of 1963?
I think I can't speak for all of them. I can't speak for any of them. Let me be clear. I can only speculate as to what motivates some portion of them to have that kind of mindset. Look, there was a story that broke, I believe it was last week, and it was pretty damning. It turned out that Ukraine had misused about $40 million in military aid that we
No,
sent.
it's not misused. They stole it. There's corruption. Wake up, Anna. Anna. I don't like the hair bun.
Somehow ended up in the bank accounts of certain politicians and military leaders. Okay.
Least surprising story ever. If
Okay.
you want to see how much people misuse our money, check into Afghanistan and Iraq.
No, 100%. Like, I get it, but I think part of the frustration that they're feeling, and I feel it to some extent too, is how black and white the war in Ukraine is being presented to the American people.
Oh, that's definitely right.
And so it's, you know, by the way, what Putin did was 1,000,000% wrong. He invaded a sovereign country, period. Okay. But at the same time, it's just the way.
And the United States is 1,000,000% wrong expanding NATO after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Anna.
Presented is Putin is bad, Ukraine all good. Ukraine all good. But no, there are some issues in Ukraine. And you've got to give your audience and your readers the proper nuance. Otherwise, people get frustrated as we keep sending more and more military aid with not enough oversight of how that military aid gets used.
Yeah, I'll even give more nuance there. So I think Russia has a legitimate concern about NATO encroaching on its border. And so that is not a crazy thing. That's not an anti-American thing. We just keep coming right up to them, and our alliances are growing and growing. Right now, I would argue that Russia, hey, maybe you could increase your alliances by being good to your neighbors rather than invading them. Okay, but so we're fair in how we talk about, hey, the legitimate interests of Russia and Ukraine, etc. But having said that, there is no
bacon grease. Why did the CIA support the instigators in the Northern Caucasus? Huh? Why? Why? Oh, that's to break up Russia and to take the oil.
Hey, I was worried about you guys encroaching on our borders, so I invaded a sovereign country. So that's not the correct solution under any circumstance.
Now, Tucker Carlson also brought up comments from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer a few days ago, in which Schumer seemingly alluded to the possibility of American boots on the ground in Ukraine, which is absolutely insane, by the way. But let's hear what Putin had to say in his response.
If we don't aid Ukraine, Putin will walk all over Ukraine. We will lose the war, and we could be fighting in Eastern Europe in a NATO ally in a few years. Americans won't like that.
Oh, let's get this straight, Schumer. Let's get this straight, Schumer. Okay? They were assuming that Russia was weak, and they wanted Ukraine to come into NATO over time. All right? And Russia didn't like that. Now Russia takes some more land. And now they're worried that Russia is going to be closer to other NATO countries like Poland and right, and Germany, get closer to Germany and all this stuff, right? So, Schumer, don't you think that Russia feels the same way that you do in terms of this encroachment? Now, there was something called the Warsaw Pact versus NATO back in the Cold War days. So this is a Cold War mentality. Warsaw, versus, this NATO alliance. If you're worried about the Russian encroachment, don't you think that the Russians are worried about the NATO encroachment? And this is why when Putin was wanting to get more integrated economically, going all the way back to early 2000, the United States balked. They said no. It was a major failure. A major failure brought to you by policy wonks that are from the Cold War era. The CIA mentality about Russia from a Cold War era. A failure of American strategic international policy. It's not that America's bad. It's just that we're run by a bunch of fucking idiots.
There. Now let's go to Putin's response.
This is a provocation.
Is this what doing your laundry looks like? Wouldn't you love it if it looked like this instead? How much easier is this?
Putin's response.
This is a provocation, and a cheap provocation at that. I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland, with mercenaries from the United States in second place, and mercenaries from Georgia in third place. Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for?
Remember, though, Putin has threatened the West with nuclear war multiple times, too. And by the way, I don't think we should have boots on the ground in Ukraine. I think that would be insane, and I think that would be a provocation, because then there would be a direct war with Russia. Do we want that? I think that would be crazy. But at the same time, I kind of can't stand the tone and framing in his answers and the fact that he's not being challenged, because again, this is a guy who invaded a sovereign country. And since we had guaranteed security to Ukraine after we convinced them to give up their nuclear arsenal in the 90s, we're providing military aid to them. That's what we're doing, right? We're fulfilling that promise without the accountability that I would like to see when it comes to that military aid.
And isn't it so?
For the last 20 years, the United States has been trying around Russia's borders to create instability. That's a fact. Anna. The United States government, through CIA operations, had been trying to create instability around Russia. Fact.
Problematic that you have media that only covers one side or another. Like in Russia, the media is 100% Russia's right, Ukraine is evil Nazis, right? But here in America, Ukraine is angels, Russia's wrong about everything. But hold on. We're worried about...
What about Trump when you cover his policies, Jenk? AKA bacon grease?
Border. Russia's worried about things that happen in their border. That's not a crazy thought. They're worried about they perceive us to be their enemies and NATO to be their enemies, and they're worried that NATO's growing stronger and stronger and encroaching more into their sphere of influence. When Russia encroached on our sphere of influence in Cuba, we nearly launched World War III, right? So let's have nuance here. But at the same time, again, Russia invaded, obviously wrong. Him then lecturing us about the war, unbearable. Us sending troops on the ground, a terrible idea. Absolutely. You see, you have to actually use your mind and judgment to see who's right and wrong, and not just revert to America, Russia, conservatives, liberals, right? Yes, but what's the facts on the ground? What's the context? What's the reality? So no, we shouldn't send troops to Ukraine. I think we should send aid to Ukraine, but does that mean we should give a $60 billion blank?
Good speech, bacon grease. But the reality of the situation is not one word is coming out of your mouth of CIA involvement. Out of control national security state for the last fucking 20 years. Maybe that didn't come out of your mouth because you got too much bacon grease in it.
Check the defense contractors and then not account for it? No, it doesn't mean that at all. And they never pass audits, so we don't even know where half that money went, right? So you could actually help them, but in a way that is responsible and balanced. But now back to Tucker, does any of this so far look responsible and balanced?
So far, no, but I do want to note that there were a few moments where he challenged Vladimir Putin,
Okay,
right?
let's
So
find out.
we're about to see one example of that. So apparently Tucker asked Putin.
With these two brainiacs that are so bright. Like a 10-watt bulb. All right. Why are their opinions even thought to be important? How could they have such a big channel and they're so freaking dumb-witted?
Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And surprisingly, Tucker Carlson actually pushed back on Putin's answer. So let's watch.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, did you I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Did you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities.
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever. And it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media.
Do we? I don't know about the US controlling media all over the world, but
yeah.
I mean, look, it's kind of interesting that this is the question that Tucker Carlson challenged him on, because I remember doing a report that investigated this, and it was people in Ukraine who blew it up.
No, that's why I'm surprised by the follow-up, but the original question was basically a softball.
Yeah.
Because, and you can tell who Tucker thinks did it, because he said it was also the largest.
There is no doubt that it was Navy SEALs run by some sort of JSOC SAC operation. No doubt about it.
Emission of CO2, that he's taking a shot at the Democratic administration.
Yeah, yes.
I thought you guys were for climate change, but you blew up Nord Stream, which released all that CO2. So look, the reality is there's very credible reporting that it was either the Ukrainians or the Americans or both of us together, right? And so, and Putin is not wrong. You see us tell you how wrong Putin was on the invasion and 100 other things. He's killed so many journalists. But he's not wrong about Nord Stream. They have no incentive to blow up their own pipeline, whereas the Ukrainians had a huge incentive to blow up that pipeline. So I think it was meant as a softball, but we're the fairest show in America. You can count the last question as a tough follow-up.
Yeah, like if you believe that and you have evidence and you have great intel, then why wouldn't you release that evidence?
I'm glad he at least pushed back on that.
And his answer to that was ridiculous, right? Where it's like, oh, well, I couldn't win the propaganda war because the US controls world media.
But yes and no. It's totally ridiculous that he wouldn't release evidence if he has it. That part is true. On the other hand, does America control most of the media in the world?
No, we don't. Jake, come on.
Yeah, we do.
Do you watch media?
Wait, that's about the most honest thing that bacon grease has said in the last 20 years.
Other countries?
So no, he said specifically Europe. So like the European governments, you see in the case of Gaza and Israel, etc., and the European media, not all of them. Channel 4 in UK
Channel
is
4 is
great,
amazing, yeah.
right? But they're the exception to the rule. So when America says this is the party line, you see it blasted out across all of Western media.
BBC's done some decent reporting.
No,
Some
BBC
decent-
is a state-run organization. It's whatever the UK, whatever England wants. Come on. I mean, are these people that idiotic? Or is it that I just have been in a world where I've been around smart people all my life? I just cannot believe how idiotic these two are.
Occasionally some decent reporting on Israel and Gaza, but I keep referring to that Guardian article about CNN's coverage from insiders at CNN because it's so interesting. And they say, no, if Israel or America has a position, it is regurgitated on air without fact checking.
Yeah, that's American media.
And that's American media, right? And that is propaganda. Whereas if the Palestinians have a position, it's fact checked 2,000 times over. It's fact checked so much that it becomes old news and then not reported sometimes by the time they're done with the fact checker. So does America do propaganda? Oh yeah, and we're really good at it.
Now finally,
so same thing with Al Jazeera. Don't forget that bacon grease.
Tucker Carlson asked an important question about a Wall Street Journal reporter who's currently imprisoned in Russia. His name is Evan Gershkovich. Let's watch.
I was going to ask you one last question, and that's about Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. And I just want to ask you directly, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them. We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner. However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that if our partners take reciprocal steps.
What makes this difference is the guy's obviously not a spy. He's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody knows that. And he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, and everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
He was receiving classified, confidential information, and he did it covertly.
He's a 2-year-old.
He committed something.
Are your kids in grades 6 to 11? Harvard has made SAT and ACT score submission optional in its admissions process. If they don't require
He committed something different. He's not just a journalist. I reiterate, he's a journalist who was secretly giving confidential information. I do not rule out that the person you refer to, Mr. Gershkovich, may return to his motherland. By the end of the day, it does not make any sense to keep him in prison in Russia.
I have so much to say about this. Number one, I'm glad that Tucker Carlson asked about this. I thought that was a great question, and he deserves credit for asking this question. Number two, it really highlights
before we go to number two, by Anna, the 10 watt bulb with a hair bun. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, so you can support my really important critiques of the world. Because where else are you going to get this pontification? So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and support PNN. One of the products that I have on my store is structural nano silver gel. It'll neutralize pathogens, put it on your hands. It'll stay active for about 5 hours. You can put it around your mouth, around your eyes, lightly coat your nostrils, around your nose, and around your ears. And that will help to neutralize pathogens. You can apply it on a cut, or an abrasion, minor burn, and it'll help to heal faster. You can use it as a skincare product. Put it on your skin right before you go to bed and exfoliate in the morning. Do that every day and you'll improve your skin. I have the best toothpaste that you can get. on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video and pinned on my channel on X. So please go to the store and get this toothpaste. It's a structural nano silver toothpaste. It will neutralize pathogens, whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, reduce that gum irritation. And by reducing that plaque and neutralizing those pathogens, you're improving your cardiovascular. It has no fluoride in it. So please go take this toothpaste from my store and use it every day, and you're going to see a major difference in your oral health. It's the best toothpaste that you can buy. We're getting out of the cold season and into the season where your people may get allergies because of pollen soon. So please go to my store and stock up on the lozenges and the drops. I have green apple lozenges in 20 count, blueberry drops in 100 count, honey lemon drops in 100 count, and 2 new products, which are Manuka honey in a 21 count lozenges and structural nano silver, elderberry, and zinc lozenges in a 21 count. So please go to the store and get the lozenges so you can soothe your throat. They'll neutralize pathogens because it's a structural nano silver. They taste great. A lot of people, really like the honey and lemon and the green apple. That seems to be one that people that really gravitate to. But please try all the different varieties that I have. They're all high quality and they all taste great. Let's find out what 10-watt bulb has to say.
How, a democratic country views journalism versus an authoritarian like Vladimir Putin. Because, yeah, journalists receive, in some cases, classified information that they then end up reporting on, okay? Oftentimes in America, that classified information gets leaked to journalists from either the FBI or CIA or members of the State Department, and then they regurgitate it without really questioning it or being skeptical of it. But nonetheless, I thought that was really interesting how he's like, oh, well, he was receiving classified information. And so, of course, now we've made him a prisoner.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this too. So first, Putin is definitely worse. And there's many reporters who accidentally tripped out of a window in Russia. This was an American reporter, so harder to kill them, but imprisoning him is outrageous, right? On the other hand,
what about scientists just dropping dead during the early days of the pandemic for no reason? Wonder why. I wonder why. Bacon grease.
In Russia, because we also brutalize people who leak classified information in a way that the government doesn't want.
When they're whistleblowers who embarrass the federal government. And that's exactly what Snowden did.
Right. And America leaks classified information all the time. And apparently Biden, Trump, everybody else takes it home too. But at least, and so we're very guilty about Edward Snowden and chasing him to the ends of the earth as well.
Julian Assange, another example.
Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning. So unfortunately, there's many examples of America being brutal too.
Yeah.
Pianos don't fall on their heads, but Chelsea Manning was arguably tortured in prison. So understand we don't have clean hands either. But now more importantly, in terms of the tenor of the interview, that was an actual tough question.
Yeah.
Okay, but the exception proves the rule, because the rest of the interview you can see for 2.5 hours is they're both yakking it up and laughing and smiling, and Putin is super relaxed and he's like leaning in like he's got his gangster lean, and he's got that smile like he's a cat who just ate a mouse, right? And he's like, oh yes, doctor, ask me a question, so good questions, right? But when he got to this one and he actually challenged him, you can see his demeanor change. He sat up a little bit, got angrier, got more defensive. So you can see the rest of the interview wasn't like that at all, because in the rest of the interview, he wasn't challenged 1%, including what is arguably the softball about Nord Stream disguised as a tough question, right? But that one was a good question. Fairest show in America. Thank you, Tucker. That was that at least the rest of it is propaganda nonsense, but at least that was a little bit of a service there, and he got Putin to say that maybe he might return him. Now, look, Putin's heart's not gonna melt, and he's not gonna be like, okay, Tucker, you take him, bring him home, right? He's still gonna want one of his top spy masters back that we have, right?
Sure.
But it was a little bit of progress. All right. Imagine if he did that for more stuff in the interview.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member,
Honestly, I think that the interview that Tucker did was the right method. Let Putin talk. Find out his health, find out his mental acuity, find out his thinking, actually learn a little bit about at least his perspective on Russian history. And you can use ChatGPT and look it up and see if he's right or not. Do your own discernment. Long form is a better way to do it. Okay, so now let's all right, let's hear from Meet Kevin, whatever his name is. I've never seen this guy before, so I don't know.
If a man wears this, he's definitely getting lucky tonight. Most jeans are either super baggy, too stiff, or have a tear.
On Thursday evening, Tucker Carlson broke the internet. In this video, we are going to break down 10 fact checks on the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview.
I just have a rule, all right? When you're doing a channel, don't get too damn post-processing, too much editing, and sure as hell don't dress up in a leather jacket unless you're doing it for a costume or some sort of joke. Come on, just looks, in these gamer seats that people sit in. I can't stand it.
Where we stand. What's next for Russia, Ukraine? What's an analysis that we can take
Background
away
noise.
after Tucker Carlson's interview? We're going to do that right now. First,
Nintendo.
I want to just thank you. On Thursday evening, we had 150,000 folks watching my commentary of Tucker Carlson's interview live at the same time. This was incredible. That commentary video got over 1.3 million views, with a 22-minute summary video thereafter getting over 500,000 views, all in the span of about 36 hours. And that is a huge thank you to all of y'all. So if you're a new subscriber here, welcome. I do my best to be as neutral as possible, and even if I don't get everything right the first time, I try my best to fix it later on. The goal here is to be neutral. So let's get into it. Fact check number one, or maybe point number one, because I don't think anybody disputes this one. The media, the mainstream media, absolutely hated Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin. Almost every single media outlet that discussed the interview was very upset at Tucker. We'll talk about why in just a moment, but listen to some of these quotes. Politico said Tucker aligned himself with the enemy, that Carlson lied, that the Western media had not even bothered to try to speak with Putin, and that he's just a useful idiot. Al Jazeera says Carlson didn't pressure Putin the way he used to sandbag on pro-democratic guests on Fox News. He didn't even try to refute Putin's outlandish and ungrounded claims. Tucker goddamned Carlson served a very well microphone stand for the crazy maniac who for 2 hours rambled about how he loved to kill Ukrainians. Let me just take a quick pause there. I didn't hear that from Putin. Neither did I really align with any of these quotes I've seen so far, because I didn't so far hear any kind of real refutation of what Tucker or Putin said. There's been a lot of this backlash without actual real analysis and commentary. I mean, consider this. Chris Wallace claims that Carlson did not interview Putin. Carlson just sat there as an eager puppet. He cashed in on a Putin and asked nothing about invading a sovereign country, the innocent lives lost, war crimes, or anything. Calling him a useful idiot is an insult to useful idiots. The New York Times says Carlson's interview with Putin is a 2-hour marathon of delusions and fakes. And also almost no fact checking, at least that I can easily find. Frankly, as an interviewer myself, since I interviewed folks like whether it's Peter Schiff or Kevin O'Leary, Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank, or my interview with Patrick Bet-David, you name it. As an interviewer myself, there is a real risk of offending the person you're interviewing to a substantial degree, to where they kick you out, they cancel your interview, they take your tapes, they ruin the potential of you ever interviewing anybody else. They prevent basically, in such a case, you would really prevent your interview from being heard by consumers at all. And so, in other words, if in an interview you're way too aggressive, you're basically saying, hey, nobody like this person should ever come on the channel again, and the free flow of ideas stops. See, usually what I like to do when I interview somebody is interview somebody and then analyze afterwards.
I get the fucking
Do we
point,
agree with
dude.
this? Do we
Jesus
disagree with
Christ.
Of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I
You just
claimed,
lied.
What I claimed was there are many organizations that say that that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my
Give me
feed
one
or
example.
not, I mean, right, and
Look
you
at
look at
it,
something like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK.
So there is a real risk to actually alienating
Just get
your
the
audience
point,
when you're trying to let somebody your interview. Daily Mail, and I'll tell you, most of it revolved around Tucker Carlson's interview was a tissue of lies. He betrayed his viewers and listeners around the world. Tucker was just a sewer for Putin's message. Why not a point-by-point breakdown of where things were right and where things are wrong? We didn't really get that from Boris Johnson.
Around the world, people are watching that ludicrous interview with Vladimir Putin conducted by Tucker Carlson, and we must not fall for this tissue of lies of the notion that Putin is somehow fated to succeed in Ukraine. On the contrary, he is doomed to fail. Rely in the day.
All we got is, well, what Putin said is a lie. Okay, well, why is it a lie? Where's the evidence that it's a lie? Remember, Putin specifically called out Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson was implicated by Putin as being the person who killed the deal Ukraine and Russia were going to sign as a negotiated settlement in Istanbul. Boris Johnson's response was he lied barefacedly about his intention to invade Ukraine. He lied about the ending of the settlement. And that's really it. We didn't really actually get evidence. You can read the piece yourself. It's in the Daily Mail. It's literally written by Boris Johnson. John Kirby says, well, look, this is from the White House, right? One of the communications directors. There's bipartisan support for Ukraine. Don't take at face value what Putin says. Why? Senate leaders, keep in mind, Senate leaders did just fail to lock in another $7.9 billion amendment for Ukraine. So that's per punch bowl as of today. So I'm not sure if there actually is bipartisan support right now, but okay. I did think it was very interesting that in 2019, you had Donald Trump encourage Zelensky to work things out with Putin. This is on video. I posted the links to a lot of this research and that video with Trump on ehack.com.
And I really hope that Russia, because I really believe that President Putin would like to do something, I really hope that you and President Putin get together and can solve your problem. That would be a tremendous achievement. And I know you're trying to do that.
Look, it's possible that I failed. Maybe I missed where the mainstream media really wanted to break down this interview fact by fact. But the reality is, I spent about 6 hours just this morning solely looking at media fact checks. And the vast majority of clips and quotes were simply, Putin's a liar. Why? Here's a second fact check where Politico is arguing Tucker Carlson is a liar. Tucker Carlson is a liar, Politico says, because Tucker says, it's not that America was going to launch a surprise attack on Russia. I didn't say that. And then Politico's like, well,
Kevin looks like he dresses up like Maroon 5 lead singer.
you're a liar because Putin says America was going to do that. Okay, so what does Putin say? Well, Putin says, quote, we know who the main adversary for the US and NATO is. It's Russia. And Ukraine will serve as the advanced foothold for such an attack. Okay, but wait a second. Let's parse this. Ukraine being a foothold does not necessarily mean the United States is going to conduct a surprise attack. There can be something known as a preemptive strike, which is, okay, let's say Russia starts moving tanks to the border where America is, and they conduct a preemptive strike, but nobody's suggesting that America was going to surprise attack Russia. Now, keep this in mind for a moment, okay, where we're going with this. So Putin's not saying that. Putin's not saying that America was going to surprise attack Russia. Putin's not saying that, or Tucker Carlson's not saying that America's going to surprise attack Russia. And Politico's like, you guys said America was going to surprise attack them. That's not true. I'm like, that's not what they said. So I wanted to clarify that. Number 3, the NATO expansion. Okay, this one is really disputed. This is a tough one. NATO expansion, oh boy, this one gets very heated. So let's just try to keep this as neutral as possible. According to France 24, they did a French piece on this. It's translated from French in 1990. I've got these all linked at ehack.com so you can see all my evidence. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker made to former Soviet leader Gorbachev during a meeting on February 9th, 1990, an agreement that NATO would not expand past the territory of East Germany. Right. A promise that was then repeated by NATO's General Secretary on a speech May 17th, 1990, that same year in Brussels. Okay, so we have this argument that Gorbachev was made a deal that NATO would not expand east, and that was echoed by NATO's General Secretary in a speech on May 17th, 1990. It's a long time ago. It's like 34 years ago. 1991, NATO Secretary
Let me show you how we do stuff around here. Actually, my department uses Monday.com, so I'm good. The work management tool? Nah, that's not for me. Well, Monday.com is all about flexibility, so you can make it your own.
1991, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was asked by Der Spiegel about NATO expansion and if they promised not to expand eastward. So about a year later. And what does the NATO General Secretary say? That simply isn't true. Such a promise was never made. There was never such a backroom deal. It's simply wrong. What happened after that? Well, in 1990, NATO accepted the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland. In 2004, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia. In 2009, Albania, Croatia. In 2017, Montenegro. And in 2020, North Macedonia. So as you can see, we've certainly moved eastward. Now, you have folks on both sides of the aisle who say, well, we never made a deal because look at Jens saying we never made a deal. And then you have other people quoting 1990 saying, wait, but you guys did make a deal. So basically, people on both sides are using different parts of history. And clearly, whether a deal was made, it was pretty much unmade very quickly. This is highly disputed. NATO claims it never promised it would not expand east. NATO actually quotes Gorbachev, the same person that France 24 said was in agreement with no eastward expansion. But in 2014, so 14 years later, Gorbachev says in an interview, the topic of NATO expansion was not discussed at all, and it wasn't brought up in any of those years. I say that with full responsibility. Not a single Eastern European country raised the issue. Not even after the Warsaw Pact ceased to exist in 1991, Western leaders didn't bring it up either. So on both sides, you have this giant potential misunderstanding that unfortunately has been going on forever. Now, I will give NATO an argument here. When people say NATO is trying to encircle Russia, NATO has a really good point when they say, hey, this is how much of Russia we've encircled. The little orange line at the top left and the tiny little bit at the top right. That's it. I'll remove myself from the bottom. But that's a pretty solid counter argument. It's still potentially NATO, well, it is NATO, right on Russia's border, which obviously unsettles Russia and Putin, but it's worth knowing that detail. Next, the Minsk agreements. Okay, these are really disputed as well. So remember that these are a series of agreements that started in 2014, Minsk 1, 2014, and then a little later in 2014, we had Minsk 2. These were ceasefire and monitoring agreements. Some people suggest that the Minsk agreement were never meant to be followed by Ukraine anyway, that they were just a tool to buy time. So basically, Ukraine wants to buy time, so they commit to the Minsk agreements. And Russia's kind of like, hey, right, Ukraine, and Putin just said this in an interview, Ukraine, you're not implementing the Minsk Accords. Why not? And Ukraine's like, well, we're not implementing them because you're not implementing them. And then you have Merkel's phone call, which just added fuel to this fire. Merkel, in a call with pranksters, where somebody pretended to be a president, and Merkel fell for it, said that the Minsk agreement bought Ukraine valuable time. This just adds complexity, because now you have folks on one side of the aisle who say, oh, so Ukraine never actually wanted to fulfill the deal. And then you have people on the other side who say, no, it's true. A ceasefire buys a country time to rebuild. But then you have people who counter that and go, rebuild for what? Rebuild your weaponry? Rebuild your defenses and fortify? So you can see how muddy this gets really quickly. So this one is very clearly disputed. And that's a lot of the problem of what's going on here is the issue between Russia and Ukraine. It's not clear cut. If it was clear cut, it'd probably be a lot easier to solve. But it's a very disputed. And both sides never actually made things crystal clear, whether on purpose because they never had the true intention of following through with them on both sides, right? Or that's just the way things played out. Who knows? Now, there was a claim that it was disgusting for Putin to claim that Poles collaborated with Nazis. That would never be true. Well, actually, it is possible that both could be true, that Poles did not collaborate with Nazis and that Poles did present and collaborate with Nazis. See, Poland currently presents itself as a noble victim during World War II, and Poland did suffer. In fact, half of all Jews who died during World War II died on Polish land. Poles resisted Nazi occupation. Some Poles helped hide their Jewish neighbors. The collaboration point of view comes from the fact that eventually you get individuals in Poland who recognize the Nazis have taken over, and you can either collaborate or die. In other words, somebody comes to your house with a gun and says, where are the Jews hiding? You get caught hiding, you're dead. Your family's dead, your wife is dead, your husband's dead, your children are dead. Or, people do this during war, they're over there. This is horrible. It's horrible, right? That would be a form of collaboration to, so to speak, save yourself. So the reality is probably both are true. There are probably people who did collaborate with the Nazis. There are probably people who would rather die than collaborate with the Nazis. So the odds are both are probably true. Poland today makes it a crime to say that anyone in Poland collaborated with Nazis. So it's clearly very touchy. Now, another fact check. This one comes down to semantics. So Politico argued that there was a decree banning negotiations with Putin. Politico says the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. Putin, or rather Politico, calls this a lie because the ban is actually on negotiating with Putin, not with Russia. Okay, so basically they're saying Putin is lying because there's a ban on negotiating with Russia, but the ban isn't actually with Russia, it's with Putin. Point of this is semantics. Putin is the president of Russia. If someone said negotiations are banned with Biden, like Biden or not, negotiations with the US would probably be dead as well. So this is semantics, and I thought this was a really weak argument to try to get out there and fact check Putin on. Putin saying, oh yeah, they ban people from negotiating with us. Collectively, for the purpose of this conflict, Putin is Russia. Number 7, fact check. A lot of people got upset about Putin's claim to be the largest European economy on the basis of PPP, purchase power parity. Putin's actually right here. Now, PPP is really complicated to understand. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. That's what I try to do on the channel. I try to keep things simple and explain them as simply as possible. All right, purchasing power parity. Basically, how much does it cost to buy a TV remote control? I'm making this totally up as an example. And a cup of coffee in America versus China versus Europe, let's say. Okay, and you know what? A rental car. So let's do a rental car, a remote control, and a cup of coffee, okay? Let's say in America, it costs $400, and that's gonna be our baseline. Let's say it costs $500 in Europe, and let's say it costs $200 in China. Well, in China, it costs half as much as the US. In Europe, it costs 25% more. So now what you could do is you can divide.
These people, I can't stand these people sometimes. When you're looking at metrics in terms of an economy, it can't be one metric. It has to be the GDP. It has to be the PPP. It has to be viewed in also debt issuance. You have to look at a mosaic of telemetry, economic telemetry, to determine the strength of an economy. It is stupid to just look at GDP. And then you can get even more nuanced. You can get it to the point where it's per capita. So you can't just look at PPP. You got to look at other metrics. It's like going to a doctor and saying, just take a look at my glucose levels, but don't look at, the protein in the urine, or, some of the other metrics that one might want in the labs.
Country's GDP by a weighting factor. So in other words, if China's GDP is $13 trillion, on a PPP basis, because everything's half as expensive, you actually divide their GDP by 0.5, which makes their GDP look twice as big. Whereas in Europe, you divide by 1.25. It's a weighting factor. You're trying to put everything in the dollars to weight it all the same, which actually makes, let's say, Germany's economy, for example, look smaller and Russia's look larger. So is it true? Yes. On a PPP basis, not the Paycheck Protection Program, on a purchasing power parity basis, yes. Europe is the largest economy in, Russia is the largest economy in Europe. However, remember, it can be very, very inaccurate because it's not that easy to calculate the cost of a basket of goods in all these different countries and then adjust them. It is also complex because usually these adjustments don't account for the costs of actually trying to buy these things, the tariffs, the taxes, supply and demand factors. So there's so much adjusting to do. It's not a good measure. And so we could agree that purchasing power parity is probably a little bit of a bad comparison. But if we are going to use it, Putin is correct. Number 8, why did the USSR collapse? So Politico says that the USSR collapsed because of economic and internal political struggles, and they complain that Putin said the collapse was initiated by Russian leadership. Again, I feel like we're trying to grasp at straws to call Putin a liar here. Both can be true. It can be true that Russian leadership was actually the reason there were internal political struggles and economic issues. Politico countered claims of Putin's argument that the US controls the world's media. Politico argues media are privately owned. Yes, most media are privately owned in America, though, let's be real. The Twitter files have made it, or at least created substantial doubt in the independence of the mainstream media. This does not make all journalists bad. This does not make all media companies bad. However, Putin hits on American doubts. He's twisting the knife in a wound of suspicion. And Americans have the right to be suspicious. In fact, everybody around the world has the right to be suspicious of what they're being told. This is why it's nice to hear the opposite point of view.
That's why I was saying about the Bio-Patriot Act and how the crisis that we went through will lead to all these things that will be surveillance technologies. There's going to be, certain provisions for passports, and there's going to be forced compliance in certain healthcare. There's going to be more funds that are going to be appropriated for the agencies and the municipalities to surveil its citizens. There's going to be more money going into surveilling, quote, terrorism in biologics.
Their own propaganda, but at least if you are provided both sets of propaganda, at least you have a little bit more ammunition to see where the differences truly lie. Now, Russell Brand goes on a rant that's, I shouldn't maybe call it a rant, but let's just say he has a somewhat simplistic approach of the US just wants more money for the military-industrial complex, that's why we're going to keep this going, which Putin hit on as well. And Russell Brand is probably correct. The military-industrial complex is very, very powerful. And many people in America are frustrated that we keep spending money for bombs and weapons for other countries. Look at the amount of money we've given Israel, and now folks are scratching their head going, wait. We're asking you not to invade Rafah City. Egypt is putting their military on high alert on the border of Rafah City, because that's right on the border with Egypt. And now y'all want to invade Rafah City, where you've got a bunch of refugees, essentially. And Israel's like, well, we got to fully eliminate Hamas. So at some point you wonder, like, if you keep supporting the supplying of weapons, are you financing people's other wars for where maybe their ability to make decisions could be skewed by the fact that you don't actually have to open your wallet? If somebody's like carte blanche, here's as much money as you need for bombs and weapons, it's probably a lot easier to make the decision to invade somewhere or not. Whereas if you actually have to cut the check yourself, you actually have to start weighing things like, okay, do we invade here or do we invade there, right? You have to pick. You can't pick everything. But if somebody else is paying for everything, it's easier to just go, I'll just keep going, right? So again, this isn't like an argument for or against Israel. It's just saying, yes, this is a fair argument for Russell Brand. Yes. And people are very frustrated in America about the military-industrial complex, the funding of wars around the world. Could we instead use that money to focus on our own needs? Now, of course, we have to balance this because other people say, hey, well, it's the reason America is deemed to be as safe as it is. The reason for it is because of the military-industrial complex. They're keeping us safe. This is obviously where debates can be had about the military-industrial complex. Take a shot every time I just said that phrase. So anyway, we wanted to give a little bit of that. It is something that has been the core of many videos, mostly because I think that is a pain point for a lot of Americans. If you go to Americans and you're like, should we keep funding, bombs in other countries? It's very popular for people to say, hell no, spend the money here in America. And there are a lot of problems America needs help with. I ran for governor in California to try to work to solve those. Zelensky's father, point 10. Zelensky's father, Putin was wrong about this. When Putin suggested that Zelensky's father fought in World War II, it was actually his grandfather. Zelensky's father was born in 1947, so that's after the war. However, Zelensky's grandfather did fight in World War II. However, he was an awarded comrade. He fought for the Soviet Union, not the Nazis. So something to keep in mind. Some other things that really aren't up for dispute. It is true that the Soviet Union did try to join NATO before the Warsaw Pact between the Russian side and various countries was signed, before the Warsaw Pact collapsed, and then a lot of those countries ended up joining NATO. NATO rejected Russia, citing a lack of democratic and defensive aims in Russia. So yes, that did happen. Some folks are picking up on Putin claiming that Ukrainians and Russians are one. This is probably false. You're probably not going to see a clear unity between the two populations anymore. But you can go all the way back to 2001, where Iraq conducted a poll. We know polls could be misleading as well, but 67.5% of Ukraine's population declared themselves as Ukrainian, and chose Ukrainian as their native language. 29.6% declared it Russian. Most of the time you're seeing their primary language being Russian on the eastern flanks, which makes sense. And as far as like nationality or ethnic origin, overall 77.8% of Ukraine's population self-identified ethnically as Ukrainian, with 17.3% identifying ethnically as Russian. Something else, and again, take these for what they are. At this point, I think things are so different between Ukraine and Russia, you're probably not going to fully assimilate. But yeah, you do need to come up with some kind of resolution because the constant war is just ridiculous. Something else that we got out of this is, frankly, Putin's health. The fact that Putin is dead is clearly not true. That he has these massive ailments and is incapable of leading probably aren't true. So it's nice to kind of put some of those conspiracies to rest. I mean, I suppose you could still have cancer. You can't really tell. Anyway, Canadian or Justin Trudeau respond to the Nazi argument. Or that's the argument that why did you invite Schutzstaffel office?
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the omega-3 supplement I have to help support your lipid profile. The goal to reduce cardiovascular disease is to bring down your LDL and bring up your HDL. Bring down your triglycerides, bring down your cholesterol, okay? Take omega-3 to be able to improve your LDL, improve your lipid profile, reduce cardiovascular disease, all right? Cardiovascular disease is a major problem in the United States. Please go to my store and get the multivitamin that I offer. It's easy to digest. You need these multivitamins and minerals to be able to act as cofactors for your different enzymes. Enzymes need cofactors so they have the proper configuration three-dimensionally to be able to properly activate and help with the metabolism, the metabolism pathways. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video and all my videos to get the multivitamin. I also have structural nano silver soaps. Please go to my store and get the oatmeal spice soap or the peppermint. I also have it in lavender and charcoal tea tree. So please go to the store and get these high quality soaps and neutralize pathogens. Back to PNN.
To Parliament and give him a standing ovation. This was a big scandal, a big faux pas in Canada, and Justin Trudeau basically said the invasion of Ukraine was unjust. No response at all to the question, so punted the question. This is why I get frustrated about the lack of like fact checking. Like if the mainstream media is supposed to be so good, where are the real fact checks? Why can't somebody go, thanks for giving us the perspective? So where do we stand now?
One, they don't have the time to put it in their really short segment. And two, they don't want to fact check. They want to demonize. It's run by the National Security State, AKA the Smith Modernization Act. The CIA is running the fucking country. Get it straight, Kevin.
Ukraine will likely rely on IMF loans and budget cuts to fund its defense, as progress to fund Ukraine is stalled in Congress and probably will be until at least January of 2025. That would be the end of January 2025 anyway. The interview will spotlight, I think the interview spotlights talk of resolutions for Russia, Ukraine, and this is good. We want people talking about negotiating this and ending this war. In fact, Putin invited for negotiation. The problem is what Putin said in terms of negotiation was blurry. There's some folks who listen to the speech from Putin or the interview from Putin. There's somewhat a speech, given that most of it was Putin talking. Some people listened to the direct Russian translation and said that our translation wasn't as good as what Putin actually said. See, our translation is, what's there to work out? If you want to stop fighting, stop supplying weapons. Then it'll be over in a few weeks. Then we can negotiate, which is basically saying, let's mop up Ukraine when they don't get supplied weapons, and then we can negotiate. That's the way it came through in English. However, people who listen to it in Russian say that's not exactly what Putin meant, suggesting that Putin is actually much more open to compromise. Because obviously the English translation is not very negotiable. So the reality, though, is both sides have dug in. Putin has dug in, Biden's dug in, Putin's doing the, well, they can call me, it's their fault, and Biden's doing, he can call us, it's his fault. It's like fifth graders fighting. It's frankly ridiculous. It's a stalemate of stubbornness. People need to wake up and get their leaders to actually get on the phone, stop being little weenie babies, and start actually negotiating nerves.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes. Congratulations, man. You've done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Pack right there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your attention.
All right, so we just got, you know, another one of these YouTube guys doing a breakdown. I mean, it was decent fact checking. I guess that part was all right. I don't like it the way he dresses. All right. Let's see what Times Radio has. This is Putin's plan B if Trump loses the U.S. election.
Jolie shower. Skinny hair care if you're not going to address the root of the problem, your shower water.
Vladimir Putin's mindset is that if Trump wins or if Biden wins, that is a win for Putin. That he sees a Trump who might be unwilling to confront him. He sees a Biden who is incapable of confronting him. And so either way, he says, you know, if it's Trump or Biden, I'm in the driver's seat. I can do whatever I want.
So first of all, Kurt, if you don't mind, I mean, many people have given their reaction to what Donald Trump said over the weekend, but what, now you've had a bit of time to consider it, what do you think of what he said?
Well, the first thing that struck me is that he was talking about the past, not talking about the present. So he was saying, I said this, they did these things. It was all about saying how he was a glorious hero. He had achieved these things. Now he should be regarded as the guy who's the most impressive person. So I don't take that as an immediate threat today. I view it as him gloating, him taking pride in the things that he did before. Now, there is the problem, however, that by taking credit for this now, he is also then implicitly saying he would do it again. And if so, I think that is a real problem. I think that we can't have these kind of threats among NATO allies. We have to have NATO allies basically willing to work together towards a common cause. And that's what we're lacking right now.
So a couple of points on this. What is the kind of effect on the mindset, if you can call it that, of Vladimir Putin, for example, if he hears Donald Trump talking about NATO again, he may be talking in the past, but we have an idea of how he feels irked by the funding situation. What effect does it have on Vladimir Putin? Some people say it emboldens him.
Well, I have to say, I think Vladimir Putin's mindset is that if Trump wins or if Biden wins, that is a win for Putin. That he sees a Trump who might be unwilling to confront him. He sees a Biden who is incapable of confronting him. And so either way, he says, if it's Trump or Biden, I'm in the driver's seat. I can do whatever I want. And I think that is a terrible thing for the free world and for the United States.
What about the point that, is there anything in what Donald Trump said that, he summarized it himself as saying, you've got to pay your bills. Is he right?
Mm-hmm. Of course he's right. Yes, of course that's right. Everybody has to pay at least 2% of GDP on defense. Everyone has to take all the threats that we face seriously.
But they don't.
Here's the problem.
Well,
here's the problem. You have a bunch of Euro whiners that want a free ride. They want the protection, but they want someone else to pay for it. This is the problem with the Europeans. They need to start paying their way in NATO.
Some do, some don't. And
am I right in saying that 11 of 30 of the 30 members met the 2% target last year?
That sounds about right. 11 sounds about right. Many are moving toward that 2% target, but have not yet reached it. But I think the bigger picture here is that everyone knows that Europe faces real threats. Europe has to have its own capacity to face these threats. The US is, by treaty and by national interest, committed to helping Europe defend against these threats. But ultimately, it rests on Europe. Europe must be willing to defend itself.
Yep.
If that's not the case, it's hard to ask American taxpayers or British taxpayers or others to say, let's defend Europe, if Europe is not doing its own share.
So does that, I'm not sure what the word is here, but does that make the kind of backbone structure of NATO a bit more difficult to defend if people are not doing what they said what they're committed to do in the first place? In other words, pay their bills.
Exactly.
Well, this is the situation that NATO has faced for decades. I mean, I started my work in the government in the Reagan administration, and there the standard was 3% of GDP toward defense. And of course, nobody met that. But that was the idea, is that everybody had to pay enough. And in reality, no one has. And so it creates these political disconnects where you have Europeans feeling like we can't do this. And on the other hand, you have Americans feel if you can't do this, then why should we? And that is the fundamental juxtaposition that we face through Clinton, through Bush, through Obama, through Trump first term, through Biden, and now we'll see what happens again.
Now, you were President Trump's special representative on Ukraine from 2017 to 2019. I think I'm right in saying. What do you think if he were to become president? Because you've explained that you think that Joe Biden, if he is president again, that he's incapable of confronting Vladimir Putin. But President Trump, if he becomes president again, what do you think he will actually do? What will his kind of method, his approach to this be?
Well, the most important thing for President Trump is to feel that others are doing their share. And what really irritates him and what really causes him to go against, to speak out against NATO allies and so forth, is that we are doing our share as the United States, paying well more than 2% of GDP on defense. And yet we see our European allies paying less, yet they are the ones that are facing an immediate security risk. So how can we tell American taxpayers that they should continue to pay for Europe's defense when Europe will not defend itself? That is his main argument. And the answer to that argument is for Europe to step up and pay for its own 2% of GDP for defense spending. And if it did that, I think it would actually create a change in.
Hi, I'm Lance Wallnau, Christian author and evangelical leader, here to remind you that God himself is hearing your prayers during these uncertain economic times. In fact, there's a promise in the Bible where God declares that he will get personally involved.
Would actually create a change in tone coming from a future Trump administration.
So if all NATO members paid their 2%, so not 11 out of 30, but all 30 paid their 2%, you think that Donald Trump would be happy to continue spending the level that America currently does, including getting this, for example, hypothetically, this $60 billion package through Congress?
Well, you're conflating many things right now. The $60 billion package is an immediate issue under the Biden administration. It is something that can or can't be done with a Democrat Senate, Republican Congress.
Of course, I'm saying hypothetically, would he do all those things? If there was a package that was going through Congress. I mean, this is hypothetical in the future. My point is that if the Europeans did everything that they had to do you think, knowing Donald Trump as you do, that he would put all the packages and continue at a rate of spending?
Well, first off, I think the current issue of providing funding for Ukraine is one that happens before there's even a U.S. election. So it'll either be in favor or against without Donald Trump becoming president. Now, in the future, if we look at that, I think that the way I would say it is he would want to know that everybody else is doing their share. I don't think he's against support for Ukraine. I don't think that he is, enamored with Russia in reality. I think it's a tactic to show that he's open to negotiating, but I don't think he's really there. And I think if we see European allies stepping up, paying 2% of GDP on defense, and articulating what they are willing to do, I think it will have an impact on the way that Donald Trump thinks about these issues. Right now, I think his thinking is, we do everything and our European allies take advantage of us. If he can change that dynamic.
I'm going to commercial here, so please bear with me. I partnered up with Rainbow Herbals, and we have created these deodorant bars made from essential oils from the Himalayas. We have it in citrus and peppermint lavender tea tree. They are very high quality deodorants for males and females. You use it every day, but it'll also help to detoxify your body. It does not have any aluminum in it. It has all natural ingredients from the Himalayas, essential oils from the Himalayas, very high quality deodorant bar. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get a couple bars of this deodorant. I also have on the store resveratrol. This is a very good antioxidant, but it helps to get also rid of senesced cells. Senesced cells are cells that don't want to go into apoptosis. They stop dividing and they just stay there and they collect garbage. And this is part of the aging process. You want to get rid of senesced cells and you want to bring down the free radicals. Take resveratrol, and that will help you towards this whole anti-aging protocol. Get my vitamin D3. It's a gene. Vitamin D3 helps to absorb calcium, but not just that. They will help to get rid of cells that need to go into apoptosis that have been infected. But not just that. It's a gene expression cofactor. So I take 10,000 units of this. Each soft gel is 5,000. So I take 2 soft gels, one in the morning, one at night. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the D3. I also have vitamin C. Helps to boost up your immune system. Take it every day. Take a double dose if you're not feeling well. It also has magnesium in it to help boost up your immune system. And not just that, drink 64 ounces of filtered water and take vitamin C and take my collagen on the store. And what you're going to do is to start improving your dermal layer for your skin.
If we can say, actually, our European allies are doing X, Y, and Z quite a lot, and it's very important. And we need you to do the next bits here and there, or to actually support what others are doing. That's a different dynamic.
Interesting. Thank you very much for your time, Kurt Volker. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now what I'm going to do is go to the Hill and do this.
If you're a business owner, then animated explainer videos are the best way to capture attention, get more followers, and drive more sales.
All right, this is the Hill's take on the Tucker Carlson interview. But before we do that, let's do just one more plug for a product, and we'll commence. Clarity Factor eliminates the brain fog, allows you to concentrate at work and in school. even if you don't go to school or let's say you're retired, you want to take this every day. The reason being is that it gets those dendrites firing, and you want those neurons to have better connection, maintain those connections, improve those connections. So you have better mental acuity, and you have better memory. You'll function better mentally. So take the clarity factor every day, and it'll be part of your anti-aging protocol. And get my C60. It's a 2 ounce, a 4 ounce, or an 8 ounce bottle. You can get it in coconut or avocado. It's a very strong antioxidant. It'll soak up those free radicals, reduce the cellular stress, improve the mitochondrial health, and boost up your ATP. When you do that on a regular basis, I take a teaspoon of this a day, do it every day, and there's going to be a compound effect, and you're going to be slowing down the aging process. Why? Because you're soaking up the free radicals. If you work out all the time, take it before your workout, and your recovery is going to be quicker. Take it on an empty stomach for better absorption. Take a teaspoon of it a day. You can get it in avocado and coconut, 2 ounce, 4 ounce, or an 8 ounce bottle on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com.
Mainstream media is coming in hot with their responses to Tucker Carlson's interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin, aired last week. One CNN headline read, "Putin walks away with propaganda victory after Tucker Carlson's softball interview." CNN wrote, over the course of the more than 2-hour sit-down, the former Fox News host turned online commentator largely refrained from challenging the Russian authoritarian whose brutal war on Ukraine has led to the needless deaths of hundreds of thousands of people.
The article continued, instead of pressing Putin on the many topics at hand, including credible accusations Russia has committed war crimes and the imprisonment of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, Carlson allowed the autocrat a free rein to manipulate the public and tell his version of history, no matter how deceptive it may have been. MSNBC also chimed in, writing, Tucker Carlson just gave Vladimir Putin exactly what he wanted. Putin is a former KGB officer. That means he's a master at manipulating and exploiting events for desired outcomes. All right, so look, here's what is true and what I said going into this interview, that doing the interview is not a bad idea. However, when you are in a situation where you have important guests and it's a very high profile interview, you have to be so prepared so that you don't become the exploited party in the interview. And right off the bat, knowing who Putin is, knowing how smart he is, knowing what his background is, he clearly has the upper hand in a situation like this with Tucker Carlson. I wouldn't want to do this because I'm not an expert in Russian history. I'm not an expert in geopolitical history. I would feel out of my depth in this situation. Anybody can get.
Unfortunately, Brianna isn't an expert on anything.
Speed. I believe in Tucker's capacity. I believe in my capacity, but you have to put it and do the work. And although I think a lot of the liberal hand-wringing about this interview is coming from a place of bias, the critique that Tucker was out of his depth at times in this interview and was not able to effectively get Putin to answer specific questions that were more clarifying than obscuring is a true critique.
I think so too, but I would say some interesting stuff came out of this anyway, and the headlines.
People want long form. Stop interrupting. Maybe, most likely Tucker, isn't, the best with history. I don't know. All right. But the far majority of the American public at least didn't have a deep time history of Russia, at the very least, from the perspective of Putin. So letting him just talk was a good idea. I think that these interviewers, they interrupt too much. It's too much about them. This is the reason why I don't like Megyn Kelly and listening to her interviews, because it's almost like, or listening to, some other newscasters or journalists. They try to do gotcha questions. You know what? I'm tired of gotcha questions. What I want is more journalists shining a light on the national security state. Now you have a national security state that's happening in Russia too. All right. So it's not just in the United States, but the erosion of our constitutional freedoms because of the CIA. And that the media is playing right into what the CIA wants them to say. You saw it in Iraq 1, Iraq 2, right after 9/11. You saw it with the crisis in 2020. They pushing a certain agenda. You saw it with what was going on even before the election in 2016. And then what happened right after the election in 2020. Mainstream media wants you to think a certain way. Now, part of that is because of their advertisers. Part of that is the puppet masters. Part of that is the CIA. This is an amalgamation of actors that are wanting to create this manufactured consensus, as Noam Chomsky calls it, to get you to think a certain way, to get you to go and buy certain things. Just a few, case in point, with the Vision from Apple. When they decided to release their design in one of their tech conferences, all right, Tim Cook was on record saying that he wasn't optimistic. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but he wasn't that optimistic about the sales for Vision Pro, because he thought it, you know, that potentially it may be too much of a shock socially, and that they really wanted, you know, more streamlined glasses, but the technology isn't there yet for these more streamlined glasses to do what they're doing with Vision. So this is kind of like the first gen for this. All right. So they didn't think it was going to sell that much. Well, you're looking at the mainstream media now, and it's all these advertising writers and all this stuff about Vision Pro, so positive, pushing this kind of like transhumanistic agenda. There's a manufactured consensus on Vision Pro for Apple that's happening, that Noam Chomsky warned us about in his writings going all the way back to the 1990s. Now, you know, he's more elderly, and he's kind of not as sharp as he used to be. He's still sharp, but he's not as sharp as he used to be, and he's already retired. But Noam Chomsky was, even though I disagree with him on from the political spectrum, because he's a socialist, all right. But the thing is that he was right. We have orchestrated a lot of coups around the world. We have done some nefarious things internationally, and we have done some really bad things domestically through our national security state. And one of the conduits for that national security state is our media. Those are facts.
That this is the worst thing that's ever happened. I mean, they're so condemning. They talk about this like this was the worst thing that has ever happened in human history. It's Tucker Carlson talking to Vladimir Putin. I learned some interesting things. At one point, Tucker Carlson said, Vladimir Putin says, let's have peace. I want peace. And Tucker says, like, okay, call Joe Biden right now. Let's make peace. And then Putin's like, well, no. We end the military aid, and then it will be over, and then we'll see. Like, okay, well, so that's not what you just said. But look, also, we do have to remember the mainstream media interviews Zelensky all the time. We get to hear from Zelensky all the time. I would say a lot of those interviews include very little pushback. So there's some kind of implicit framing here in that what Putin is saying, that I want you to stop arming Ukraine, is de facto wrong. So him saying it, it's like you're not supposed to hear him saying that because that position is wrong. Now, that's not how a lot of the American people feel. It's not how many of the Republican Party members feel. They have questions whether this continued funding is good. And so I think it was helpful to hear that perspective. And in some of this comment, I was particularly struck by the Washington Post commentary on this. Here's a paragraph in the Washington Post, just slamming this interview. Putin also told Carlson that a main reason for the invasion and one of Moscow's continuing chief goals is the denazification of Ukraine, part of Putin's continuing false allegation that Kiev is controlled by Nazis. Ukraine, and now this is just a claim they're making in this Washington Post article. Ukraine is a democracy, and Zelensky, who was overwhelmingly elected president in 2019, is of Jewish descent, as are other top officials. Putin's real goal, many analysts say.
Did the United States conduct a coup in 2014 in Ukraine? Yes or no? And I think that more people need to ask that question and investigate it. And I think you probably will come to the conclusion that the CIA ran a covert operation to conduct a coup in Ukraine.
Zelensky in favor of a Russian puppet regime. Look, Ukraine is sort of a democracy. They've suspended opposition parties. They've just suspended opposition media. I do not think Zelensky is not a Nazi and top officials are not Nazis, but there are in fact Nazi battalions that are part of it. Like, that's just true. It's uncomfortable. Mainstream media hates when you point it out, but it is in fact true. Putin says his goal is not the overthrow of the entire country, but a return of these disputed territories. Now, you can say he's lying, that's not true, but we've heard from Zelensky's perspective. Why should we not also hear Putin's perspective on the conflict so that we can make an informed judgment as taxpayers for what we're going to fund here?
And Putin specifically spoke to the story we covered where Canada awarded this big award to a Nazi and had to retract it. Specifically alluded to Zelensky visiting Nazi Azov, troops in Ukraine. And instead of engaging with those pointed and legitimate criticisms, even to the extent of saying there are some Nazis in Ukraine, but they are not the overwhelming jesting, we still think that even that's a legitimate goal, that's a pretext for actions that are not appropriate or validated by the laws of war. I mean, you could say something like that, but that goes so far in the opposite direction. I agree they end up kind of, frankly, making themselves look like such unreliable critics that some of the things that I think Putin should be offering some pushback on just could go unanalyzed. So Putin also talked about, in addition to the denazification argument, the Nord Stream pipeline. Tucker asked him, well, who do you think blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? And, Putin is good. He's the KGB. He's able to slip and slide out of some of this. There's the translation delay that I think made it not the easiest job for Tucker as well. Maybe it'd be nice to have someone interview him in Russian. There's plenty of Americans that speak Russian and are also journalists. That seems like a good way to go. But he said, well, look, you have to have a confluence of ability and interest in doing something like that. There are a lot of people who might have an interest in blowing up.
Don't forget, the intelligence agencies were surveilling Tucker as he was trying to get this interview. Why? Why does the government feel as though they need to watch its citizens? Because the government wants to, one, control the narrative, and two, make sure no one reveals what the government's doing.
Well, not so many that have the ability. And basically, what do you think? It was an interesting exchange. He denied the idea that he is endeavoring to start some kind of global war and conquer all of Europe, which has very much been the line out of the West. He says it doesn't make any sense. Tucker asked him, is there a world where we could see you like invading Poland? He said, what interest do I have in invading Poland? What interest do I have in starting World War III? People have been saying about Russia for years that we have nuclear bombs. We're going to drop nuclear bombs. What interest do I have in this? And why aren't these accusations basically being made to other nuclear powers? And on and on and on. So it is a shame to not be able to have the perspective of the fact that this was a wholesome, like a holistic interview that touched on a number of subjects that frankly are not conversations that are brought up with our allies, as you pointed out with Zelensky. And the read that we just had where somebody mentioned, why isn't he being challenged on war crimes that he's perpetrated in Ukraine? it springs to mind immediately that why, when Netanyahu was doing mainstream interviews, is he's not being challenged on war crimes, especially since we have the highest international court weighing in to say that not just any old war crime, but genocide is plausible in Gaza. I mean, the double standard, again, is just such that it really undermines the value of the mainstream media.
Yeah, and look, again, you can say that he's wrong. I don't, you can conclude after listening to this, I don't believe Vladimir Putin. I do think he has imperial ambitions. Sure. This war is unjustified, and he's trying to get us to not give any more weapons, and then I think he's going to invade the whole country. Like, you can still reach that conclusion if you want.
Perhaps that conclusion would not have happened if it wasn't for the encroachment of NATO. Who started this? Remember, NATO expansion, or NATO's ambition for expansion, happened even before Putin got into office.
But I don't know, it doesn't seem fair. In fact, it seems a little propagandistic to say you should be shielded from this perspective, but you should uncritically receive the Zelensky perspective at every turn. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I thought it was pretty interesting. And then in fairer recaps of what happened, or what went on in the interview, like I saw, Slate had a headline that was everything that was wrong with Tucker Carlson's Putin interview, and is very critical. But they do acknowledge that when he's talking about the history of NATO and what was that there is, some of it was exaggerated on the Putin part, how aggrieved he is over the NATO stuff, but that some of it was accurate, describing that NATO membership was never going to happen, that it was offered, that it was, that whole kind of history of how things went down from Clinton and then Bush in a way that made Russia feel boxed in. So anyway, I thought it was interesting after all, and certainly not something that you.
It's a colossal failure of American foreign policy, not integrating more economically with Russia when we had the chance. And now we blew it. And it's going to cost us a lot more money to fix the problem. Let me just do a quick commercial here. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nano silver liquid that I offer. You can get it you can get the Max 35 or the Max 14 or the silver solution. I have them in different ppms. Max 35 is 35 ppms. Max 14 is 14 ppms. The silver solution is 30 ppms. So please go to my store, take a teaspoon of this a day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon of it a day or two, depending on how you feel, and it'll help to neutralize pathogens. Take it every day. Another part of my anti-aging protocol is bringing down inflammation. So the first two pillars is using the structural nano silver liquids and gels to neutralize pathogens. The second pillar is to use C60 to neutralize free radicals. And the third part of the pillar is to bring down inflammation. You do that by taking ashwagandha root. That will control your blood glucose levels and reduce that inflammatory response cardiovascularly. And take turmeric and do that every day with C60 and the structural nano silver liquid. That way, you are going to move in the right direction as the core for your anti-aging protocol, and then you add the other supplements as needed. Lastly, take a good probiotic. I have two different probiotics. I have one in capsules and another one in powder. The one I have in my hand is the powdered one. I use the powdered one every day. I mix it with my food. Some people prefer the powder. Some people, it's just easier for them to take the capsules. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the probiotic. You want a good gut biome for proper absorption, proper stools consistency, and that better communication between your gut and your liver, because that's where your metabolism is coming from. And also mental health, mental acuity is related to gut health. So please take my advice and get my probiotics on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get your health into the proper direction, get into homeostasis.
you would be, cover your ears so that you don't hear this. You got to let people decide for themselves at some point. I think it's fair to say there should have been more pushback. Frankly, he just went on and on at the beginning. It was hard to get a word in, and because of the translation issues, I think it was a daunting task.
Yeah.
But I found it interesting.
Well, big numbers for Tucker Carlson with this, along with a lot of his other interviews. Certainly, it does seem to be modeling a avenue for success for alternative media. He is able to give these big interviews, and a lot of people are tuning in, even if the mainstream news coverage is not so fond of that reality. So let us know what you think in the comments, and stick around. We have more Rising for you coming up next.
Interviews are going to be longer form and less interruptions with the guest. That's where this is going. That's what people want. Interesting people, maybe different perspectives. Some of it's going to be international. Some of it may be religious oriented. Some of it may be scientific oriented, whatever. But that people want to be informed. All right. So that's going to be the end of this broadcast. Thank you for listening. For the ones that are on X that have been listening, I appreciate it. And please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the products that I offer. In addition, I have uploaded additional lectures for my pulmonology courses on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. You just go to store and drop down to classes, and you can purchase the pulmonology module for $50. For $50, what you get is 22 PDF files that you can download, and you will get an accompanying lecture to each slide deck. There is going to be 22 lectures. I just uploaded today the lung physical exam, how to do that, what the different sounds are that you hear in auscultation through the stethoscope, so you get a better idea of the pulmonary system. I have uploaded several lectures so far. There's going to be 22 that will be totally uploaded, and each day until that module is completely populated, each business day, I put up a new lecture. So thank you for listening. Please take the time, go to the store, get the products, and also look into that pulmonology module to learn about the pulmonary system, just for $50, and you're going to get a lot of knowledge on how to improve your health and how to kind of reduce that power imbalance between the physician and the patient. So when you go to your doctor, you'll be more informed, and you won't be pressured in doing things that maybe you shouldn't be doing. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.